Hi there. So in this video, I'm going to talk through some tips for getting A star in A-level history essays, or just reaching the top level of the mark scheme. So if you haven't watched my earlier video on just A-level exam technique, essay technique, then definitely do that first, because this is really a follow-up to that initial video. So basically, if it's not a sort or interpretations question, these tips should help, and it applies to papers 1, 2, and 3. And some of the things here would help with coursework as well, just generally writing in history. Here we can see Charles I. This was when he did his history A-level exam back in the 1600s. So let's have a look at the top level of the mark scheme. This is what we're aiming for here. So just going through each of the bullet points and highlighting the key issues. The first bullet point talks about a sustained analysis. Okay, so sustained analysis means that the essay is driven by analysis. It doesn't lapse into telling the story. It doesn't lapse into narrative. It's a very analytical piece of work. Okay, that's what the first one's saying. The second one talks about sufficient knowledge. So what I take that as is that there's no gaps, there's no significant gaps. There's a range of evidence used within the essay to fully kind of answer the question. The third bullet point is maybe the most tricky, and that's about valid criteria, establishing valid criteria to make a judgment. So what that means is kind of defining key terms in the question. How are you weighing up, how are you assessing and defining the key terms in the question? And then finally, the answer is well organized. So this is the basics, intro, 3 paragraphs, conclusion. Again, my earlier video goes into that. So I've got 7 key tips that I'm going to go through in this video. And this is based on my experience of teaching history A-level, and also my discussions with people who've achieved A star, students who've achieved A star, and some of the things that they've done and that have worked for them. So I'm just going to run through these, and you can obviously pause this video and take notes as I'm going through, because I'm going to go through these somewhat quickly, but there's going to be 7 key points. So the first one is bullet point argument before you plan your essay. So when you go into the exam and you see the question, a really good tip to ensure that you have a consistent line of argument throughout the essay is to read the question, and before you do anything else, think, what's the argument going to be? Okay, so this is a question from 2017. From Britain, 1625 to 1701. And the question is, how accurate is it to say that religious nonconformity survived the persecution during the Restoration, mainly due to the actions and attitudes of Charles II and James II? So why did nonconformity survive following the Restoration? The factor they've given is the actions and attitudes of Charles II and James II. So you might think, okay, was it that? Was it something else? You might think, okay, I'm going to go for it was the failure of the Clarendon Code. Okay, so here is a bullet point argument just before you even start planning. The main reason is actually due to failure of the Clarendon Code, is it narrowed the church and created more dissent. The actions of Charles II and James II were more symbolic, and they undermined the Clarendon Code. So that furthers your argument. So what you need to do then is, when you've written your bullet point argument initially, you can then consistently engage with that throughout the essay. And I'm going to come back to that in a later point. Essay planning just generally is very, very key to revision. And when you're in the exam, obviously planning the essays before you start writing. So when you're planning your essays, have an argument with a basis in your essay plans. Get used to doing that. Okay, so the next tip is having a basis for the argument. So I've just mentioned that. So it's the same question again. Religious nonconformity survived persecution during the Restoration, mainly due to the actions and attitudes of Charles II and James II. So your argument is that it was due to the failure of the Clarendon Code. Okay. Now, what you've got to do is not just leave it at that. So you can see here the bit that's underlined. Failure of the Clarendon Code is the key issue as it narrowed the church and created more dissent. That's the basis of the argument. You're backing it up. So as you can see here, it's saying why your argument is correct, not just leaving it, overall, it was the Clarendon Code. That's not enough, okay? It's absolutely vital for the top level that you have a basis for your argument. So as I said, when you're planning essays as part of your revision, get used to doing that. Don't just put a circle around the one that you think is the most important. Actually having a basis for your argument, getting used to doing that. It's really, really important. So in the intro, having that basis for your argument is really important that you come back to throughout the essay. Okay, so the third key tip, and I've talked about planning a little bit, it's just in the exam, making sure that you take time to plan the essay, plan the question. And here are some steps that I would suggest. So as I said in my first tip, having deciding what your argument is with the basis, do that first. Decide on your 3 paragraph headings, and then think of what evidence you're going to use. So if I just run through this question from 2018 exam, again, it's paper 1, Britain, 1625 to 1701. And the question is, to what extent was the growth of banking and insurance responsible for the expansion of the Stuart economy in the years 1625 to 88? So the growth of banking and insurance is the factor that you've been given. Okay, so that's going to be your paragraph 1. And you're assessing the expansion of the Stuart economy. So issues, factors, things that led to the expansion of the Stuart economy. And the dates, 1625 to 88. So try and follow, when you're planning these, try and follow the same kind of structure where you maybe underline the factor, you circle the thing you're assessing, and maybe put a box around the dates. So for this one, you might think, actually, it wasn't banking and insurance. That wasn't the main factor. It was overseas expansion, for example. So you might go for a plan like this: banking and insurance, overseas, and then you're going to talk about agriculture. So just make sure you kind of plan it out before you write, and then it's much clearer and more consistent, and you're more likely to stick with an argument and stick with the structure. And it also saves you time in the exam. Okay. So having a consistent line of argument, obviously this slide is quite busy, but I'm really trying to emphasize a point here. So having a consistent line of argument is absolutely vital throughout your essay. And here is a question: to what extent were radical political and religious ideas responsible for the failure of Republican rule? So you've got that question, and you might think, actually, I don't think it was radical political and religious ideas that were responsible for the failure of republic. It was actually military involvement, because it undermined all attempts at political settlement. Radical ideas and failures of Cromwell also led to the failure of the republic. Okay, so your argument you're gonna disagree with the question and say it was military involvement. So in your intro, you do context, definition, argument. In your argument here, military involvement. Paragraph 1 is on the factor in the question. It should always be the factor in the question first. So radical ideas, so you're going to talk about radical ideas. In the summary at the end of the paragraph, that's when you bring in your argument again and say, actually, radical ideas did distract the government. However, the military involvement was the most important factor. Yeah, and you're just going to explain why. So you link into your argument in paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is going to be on military involvement. It's going to be the one you're arguing. And again, at the end of the paragraph, you're weighing it up against the one in the question. Okay. Paragraph 3 is on another factor. So I've put failures of Cromwell, for example, or actions of Cromwell. And again, you link back to your argument at the end of that paragraph and kind of weigh it up against the one that you've been talking about in the paragraph and the one in the question. So you've got to weigh up kind of all 3 here. So that's really important. In the conclusion, you're answering the question and giving your argument again. So yes, it is repetitive. Having a consistent line of argument means that you're consistently engaging with it. It shouldn't be a surprise just in the conclusion. It should be running as a thread throughout your whole essay. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. Okay, so the 5th tip is consistently engaging with the question. Okay, so try and link back to the key terms in the question. All right, so here's a question. from paper 3, Civil Rights in the USA, 1850 to 2009. And the question is, how far was the publication of To Kill a Mockingbird in 1960 the key turning point in the shaping of white attitudes towards race relations in the United States in the years 1850 to 2009? So what I do when I'm teaching this is I ask my class, what's the key term in this question, or key terms? What are the most important words in this question that you're going to be engaging with consistently? So if you want to try this, you can pause the video and have a think. What do you think you'll be engaging with consistently? So the real key thing that you're going to be engaging with here, obviously attitudes are important, shaping attitudes. That's what you're going to be talking about. But it's this idea of a turning point, isn't it? That's really what you're assessing. To what extent was To Kill a Mockingbird the key turning point? So you're going to be weighing up To Kill a Mockingbird against other turning points. So you're going to have to engage with what a turning point means. So it could be something that's irreversible. It could be something that brings about widespread change. It could be something that's unprecedented. You know, these kind of ideas when you're to assess a turning point. In this question, you might say, actually, it wasn't To Kill a Mockingbird. It was Uncle Tom's Cabin, for example. So consistently engaging with the key terms in the question, really highlight the key words that you're going to be coming back to. Okay, so tip number 6 is the use of analytical language. So really, to get to the top level, you need to be using developed analytical language. So moving beyond things like this was important, you know, really using terms like this was a catalyst, this had a long-term impact, it was transformative, or, you know, it was superficial or symbolic, or, you know, just weighing things up in a very kind of analytical way is really important. This really can make a difference between going from a B grade to an A grade essay, or from an A to an A star essay. I think, you know, think about level 4 of the mark scheme, you're less likely to see this kind of language. Level 5, you're more likely to see this kind of language. So I'm really trying to weave these words into your analysis. And even as I put at that point at the bottom, the points at the start of your paragraph, actually saying something like, instead of saying one factor which caused political instability was money, you could say money was a key cause of political instability as it exacerbated the existing divisions between the monarch and parliament. I mean, that's much, much better, isn't it? So something like that can really, really bump up your grade and make your essay stand out to the examiner. Okay, so the 7th and final tip for getting an A star in your history essays is using a range of evidence. Okay, so A star students are the students who tend to go beyond the textbook. So without telling the story, they're weaving in a range of evidence to highlight a really deep understanding of the issues. So what I've got here is a question from the 2017 paper 1, Britain 1625 to 1701, and this is the section B question on social change, and this is a real answer from a student that I taught and they got 20 out of 20. This is a 20 out of 20 answer. So the question is, how accurate is it to say that the social structure of Britain was transformed in the years 1625 to 88? And you can see what they've done with the question there. They've you know, put a box around the key terms, and they've underlined the dates, just what I was talking about before. So here is a paragraph on population growth. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly read through this, and I've underlined just the range of evidence. So another way in which social structure was transformed was through population growth and urbanization that happened in this period, which was a stark change that continues well into the present. So again, using that analytical language, a stark change. In 1625, London's population was a mere 200,000, but by the end of the period, it had risen to 575,000. Spread of new ideas. People came specifically to London as it had become the epicenter of growth, intellectual, economic, and social. Population growth also led to a higher demand for agricultural change, which also revolutionized during this period. So this is linking to another topic, even with new crops such as clover, artichoke, and asparagus, specialized farming, and the introduction of water meadows and enclosure. Despite the benefits. Growth in population also led to an increase in poverty. By the end of the period, 2/3 of London's inhabitants lived near the poverty line. Consequently, legislation like the Settlement Act 1662 meant that migration of vagrants was limited. Therefore, population growth positively and negatively impacted the transformation of the social structure of Britain. Though it led to urbanisation and consequent economic advancement, it also meant the growth of poverty. So you can see consistent engagement with the question, but just that range of evidence within that paragraph, really precise, giving really clear kind of concrete examples. Obviously, I've gone through that really quick, and you can pause it and look at those things in more detail. So finally, here's a summary of what I've said, and this is from Simon Schama. Obviously, he didn't say these things. This is just a way to summarize it. So planning is key. Planning your essays before you write them, having a consistent line of argument throughout your essay with a basis, consistent analytical engagement with the question, using that analytical language that we've just been talking about, and using a range of precise evidence. So I hope that has been useful in helping you understand what you need to do to get to the top level of the mark scheme in your history essays. Thank you.